Okay, well, it's after 7, and it's so nice to see all of you here this evening. And every month, when we have these meetings and I see people showing up and caring, it's really uplifting, especially lately. So we really do appreciate your presence and your interest, and knowing that so many people want to learn about climate solutions and climate justice. We'll turn things over to our speaker, Franz Hartmann, from the Alliance for Liveable Ontario in a few minutes, and we just have a couple announcements and a bit of housekeeping.
As we approach this subject tonight of affordable housing, I feel that it's kind of important that we recognize that many of the Indigenous people of this land and their ancestors, of course, also experienced a significant loss of housing, unfortunately, at the hands of the colonizers that came to this country not really that long ago. And for that reason and others, it's important to recognize that this area that includes Peterborough and Nogojiwanong is located on the Treaty 20 Mississauga territory and the traditional territory of the Mississauga Chippewa nations. For our grandchildren acknowledges that the Williams Treaty First Nations are the stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters, and that we must join them in their effort to maintain this responsibility, ensuring the health and integrity of these lands, not only now, but for generations to come. So miigwech to any Anishinaabe that have joined us this evening. A little bit about who we are. 4RG is a climate action group based in Peterborough and Nogojiwanong, and our mission is to engage and mobilize people to take effective action in response to the climate crisis. So 4RG has very active committees, and you can learn more about them and find out ways to become more active yourself by checking out our website. And we also have a newsletter, a Facebook page, Facebook group, and an Instagram account.
So before we start with the presentation, Guy, can I pass things over to you to tell us about the Peterborough Nogojiwanong Climate Action Plan? But first of all, for those of you who don't know Guy, he is our founder and chair of the Peterborough chapter of For Our Grandchildren. And among many other things that he's done, aren't you called Captain Climate too? You can tell us that story. He participated in the Peterborough Climate Action Plan Task Force.
But what I did want to talk about today was the Climate Change Action Plan 2.0, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. It's coming before council. I've forgotten the exact date, but it's early in March. I'm pretty sure Marilyn remembers the exact date. But our message that we need to be passing to our councillors and to the public is that this plan, if completely implemented, will save Peterborough community $1 billion by 2050. That's more than 950 million. It's $1 billion, and it's not quite worthy of Dr. Evil, but it's a big, big number. And we're trying to promote this not because it saves the climate, but because it saves people money if we do the right thing. And the other thing that it does is it improves people's health. It improves local health conditions in community health. So that's coming up, and Marilyn's probably got something to say about the phone zap that we have going on in advance of that event. But we all should be writing to the editor about it and using the talking points that are on our website and talking to our councillors or our mayor if we possibly can. And I had a chance with somebody who's not on this call now to meet with the mayor, and we did talk about this, and he thinks that climate has gotten to position number 11 in people's attention span. And he might be right, but I tried to inform him that it's not his job to follow the polls, but to lead people to where he knows we need to go. There's my spiel.
Okay. I wonder, Marilyn, could you just say a word or two about the phone zap?
Yeah, the phone zap, as many of you know, got postponed because the whole presentation to council also got postponed. Right now, keep this in mind, you will get a tickler on this. Hopefully, our phone zap is going to be on March 27th, which is the date that the Climate Action Plan 2.0 gets released to the public here in Peterborough. So assuming that things go along smoothly and we have no big surprise, you'll get something in the email, save the date, and then a registration. and we'll go for it.
Perfect.
Great, thank you.
And the intention, if I understand correctly, Marilyn, is to leave all of our councillors' mailboxes, phone mailboxes, filled with messages that say, you got to pass this, you got to implement this, you save $1 billion.
When it's released on Thursday, by Thursday night, in the space of 1/2 an hour, their phone boxes, their mailboxes and voicemail boxes will be full, so that when they check their work phones on Friday, it'll be like a flood.
Perfect.
Wonderful.
That's great. So, yeah, that brings us to tonight's presentation. And we're going to hear a little bit more from Marilyn, as she's going to introduce our speaker. And I should just let you know that Marilyn, obviously an active member in 4RG. She's on the board of directors, the political action committee, and the communications committee. And she does some awesome book reviews, which can also be found on the website. So if you wouldn't mind, Marilyn, introduce Franz.
Franz is the coordinator of the Alliance for a Liveable Ontario and has a long history in building alliances and community engagement. He served as the chair of the Ontario Greenbelt Alliance from 2014 to 2018 and the coordinator between 2019 and 2024, and helped the Alliance build a vast community support for the Greenbelt. Franz was the executive director of the Toronto Environmental Alliance, TEA, for 11 years, and under his leadership, TEA succeeded in getting key environmental policies adopted at City Hall, including a new climate action plan and a zero waste plan. Franz expanded TEA's community engagement activities in all areas of the city and enlisted many non-environmental community partners. Prior to working at TEA, Franz was the environmental advisor to City Councillor Jack Layton and oversaw Jack's civil society engagement activities on Ottawa. Now, I'm not going to say anything myself about the Trillium Declaration. I hope that, Franz, you'll do that in your presentation. And I have one little fun fact about Franz that I dug up, and hopefully this is accurate because I don't know, but a couple of years ago, Franz and his partner Karen built a really well-insulated, energy-efficient, heat-pumped laneway house behind their main house, in which they plan to retire. I don't know if you've retired yet, in order to stay in the neighborhood that they really love. At that time, and I don't know if it's still the case, Franz didn't own a car because he was very close to all the TTC you could ever want. And one of the plans for the house, and I don't know if that's happened yet, is a green roof. So this is a man who really lives his values. Franz, take it away.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thanks to all of you for making time this evening. I'm just going to hit the share button here and hope that the technology is working. Yes, as Marilyn said, my name is Franz Hartmann. I'm the coordinator for Alliance for Liveable Ontario. Just a very short, a quick description of who we are. We're an alliance of people and groups representing hundreds of thousands of Ontarians from many different sectors. We have groups from the agriculture, urban planning, environment, housing affordability, tenant, neighborhood associations, labor, healthcare, academia, businesses, and developers who are part of the alliance. Just very quickly, a bit about myself to help set the context. And some of you who are from outside of the province, thank you so much for joining, but this is going to be focused on Ontario. I grew up in suburban Waterloo, which is about an hour and a quarter southwest of Toronto. That's the house that I grew up in. It doesn't look like that anymore. It's been dramatically renovated since I think about 2014, but I grew up in suburbia. And this is where I live now. This is my house near Bloor and Dufferin. It's the house with the red door. And we live across from an inner city park, which is beautiful. I know that there are 153 trees in the park. I've counted them because I walk around that park a lot. And as Marilyn said, we built a laneway house, which we started renting out in, I guess it was February 2022. And it's a house that we want to grow old in. We had our architect designed it for us to age in place. It's designed to carry a green roof. We haven't installed it yet. And the idea is to move in there. And in fact, we will be moving in there as of June 1st and rent out the main house to a number of, or to a family or to students. The main house is 4 bedrooms. Karen and I are the only ones in it. We are dramatically overhoused. So moving into the laneway house will not only provide more housing, it'll also provide us with some income so that our retirement savings don't go down as quickly as possible. So you may be asking yourself, well, why are we talking about housing for a group that really focuses on the environment? And why I, who have been an environmentalist, a practicing environmentalist for most of my life, why housing? Well, because the housing we build, how we build it, where we build it, and how we move around through the house, from house to house to where we work and live and play, has a huge impact on the environment, has a huge impact on carbon emissions, has a huge impact on ecosystem health, and it has a huge impact on climate resilience. And if we get housing right, we can actually reduce our carbon emissions. We can improve ecological resilience. And of course, we can also deal with a major crisis. And of course, the flip side to that is if we get housing wrong, we're actually going to make these things all worse. So I'm interested in helping get it right. So most of us, and I suspect this is even the case for, I know there's a gentleman joining us from Calgary, we have a housing crisis in Ontario, and I want to spend just a couple of minutes outlining what it looks like. For too many Ontarians, they're spending more than 30% of their gross household income on rent and mortgage costs. CMHC, Canada Mortgage Housing Corporation, decades ago said, you know, you shouldn't be spending more than 30% of your gross household income on rent or mortgage costs. This is understood in many, many countries across the planet. Now, I've done some calculations, and if we had a bit more time, I would go into them. The average salary compared to the average rent is the salary is 47%, or sorry, the rent is 47% of the salary. To buy a house in Ontario in September 2024, was required twice as much money, salary twice the size that current average salaries are. In other words, housing is really unaffordable. The other problem is that too many Ontarians can't afford the right size home in the neighborhood they want to live in. I see this all the time. My daughter lives in Ottawa. She would love to come back to Toronto. She can't because the salary she makes would mean that if she could find a job here in Toronto for the same salary, she'd be spending close to half of her income on rent. And too many Ontarians also believe we need to sacrifice environmental protection for new housing. This has been what we've been told by the provincial government for the last 2.5 years. We're not hearing it this election, but we did hear it in the June 2022 election, where the Premier told us repeatedly, we're going to have to sacrifice some environmental protections to get the housing built that we want. So why do these problems exist? Why do we have high rents, high housing costs? Why can't people find the homes that they want? Why are they being told that they have to sacrifice environmental protection for housing? Well, for starters, we're building the wrong mix of housing types. We're building too many single-family homes in suburban or in subdivisions in suburbs that used to be on agricultural land that grows food or on natural areas. And we're building too many high-rise buildings filled with postage stamp size condo units. And we're not building enough what's called gentle density, missing middle housing, mid-rise housing. The laneway house is an example of missing middle housing. And yes, I continue not owning a car. I suspect my life will end without me ever owning a car. And just to give you a sense of the benefits of that, the money my partner and I have saved since we have been together helped pay for half of that house. So not enough of these homes are being built, not enough of the mid-rise buildings like the one at the bottom right corner of this picture are being built. Not enough family density housing is being built, like at the below the laneway house. This is a housing co-op in Toronto, in St. Lawrence Market area, that it provides 2-3 bedroom units. Another problem is we're building in the wrong places. Precious farmland and natural areas are being destroyed to build single-family homes that are increasingly unaffordable. And by doing that, it reduces our food security, and it makes us more vulnerable to the climate crisis and to increased costs. And a third reason we're having these problems is that we're no longer building what's called non-market affordable housing. Now, non-market affordable housing is a fancy schmancy way of saying not-for-profit housing that is where rents are based on a not-for-profit basis. They're not designed to maximize rate of return for the landlords. They're designed to break even. And from the 1960s to the early 1990s, governments financed the construction of tens of thousands of non-market homes every year in Canada. And these homes have been and continue to be run by not-for-profit organizations like housing co-ops, not-for-profit housing providers. Even governments used to own and operate them. But then they stopped in the mid-90s for a whole bunch of reasons, which I don't have time to get into. But Ontario and Canada, in a sense, was a bit of an anomaly because many countries continued building non-market affordable housing, in particular in Austria. Vienna is a textbook example of how you can have non-market housing built and a vibrant market housing sector. And they don't have, if they have a housing crisis, it is but a pale imitation of what we have. So in the fall of 2024, we actually created a report card that evaluated how the province has been doing in the last 2.5 years on the housing file. Many of you will remember the last election in June 2022, the Premier made it clear he was going to get things done. He was going to solve the housing crisis. Well, what we did was we looked at all of the laws and regulations and policies that have been adopted by the province, and we measured them against 3 criteria. Do they build affordable homes in towns and cities, not on farmland? And what we found was that the province actually prioritized single-family homes on farmland, natural areas in the Greenbelt. They removed municipal powers to stop sprawl. Then we said, well, they need to build a wide variety of housing types, not more single-family homes and small condo units, because that's what people need. Not everybody wants a postage stamp-sized condo unit or a large single-family home. What did the province do in the last 2.5 years? They eliminated requirements to build missing middle, mid-rise, and other diverse housing types in towns and cities. And then the third thing we said, well, they need to invest heavily in non-market affordable housing because that's the only way this sort of housing is going to get built. What did the province do? Well, it failed to invest in helping housing providers build much needed non-market housing. In fact, the investments by the province have been, if they haven't been zero, have been pretty close to it. In short, the province is pushing the wrong type of housing in the wrong places at the wrong prices. So if we want to protect farmland and natural areas in the Greenbelt from costly and destructive suburban sprawl, we need to make sure the public is demanding the right actions from government. And if we want the next generation of Ontarians, our children, our grandchildren, to have homes that are affordable and part of livable communities, we need to make sure the public is demanding the right actions from government. So we, the Alliance for Liveable Ontario, got a whole bunch of smart people together, and we came up with 5 actions that will do both. And I want to show you, and it's part of a campaign we're calling Taking Action Together, 5 Ways to Make Homes Affordable in Ontario. And I want to show you this video, and if Scott could give me a thumbs up that when you hear it, just so that I know it's getting through.
You probably know someone who can't find a home they can afford. It wasn't always like this. And while we can argue and debate about what happened and didn't happen, talking won't make affordable homes happen. So a bunch of us got together and found 5 ways that will. Number 1, gutting farmland and nature to build McMansions in places where you need 2 cars and have to install expensive infrastructure is not the answer. We need to build in the right places, affordable, livable neighborhoods where people already live and want to live. And we already have enough ready-to-build room inside our towns and cities to do it. Number 2, While everyone needs something different and affordable, too many of these are being built. We need to build a wide variety of housing types: low-rise, mid-rise, not-for-profit, multi-unit, multi-family, multi-bedroom. A multiplex of more affordable, appropriate options for every stage of life. Number 3, the way most homes are built and the laws around building them are not built for affordability or speed. We need to build smarter and faster, like more wood frame and prefab panel homes, and updating old rules, like high-rises needing parking for everyone. We can cut costs and time with faster and smarter rules, approvals, and building methods. Number 4, for decades, our governments built and operated affordable, non-market housing. Then, affordable housing stopped going up, but rents didn't. We need to invest heavily in non-market affordable housing. And we is our governments. Builders will build it, co-ops and other groups will run it, but our governments must invest in it because almost no one else is. Number 5, we can't be hurrying like mad to approve and demolish and build without stopping to think about neighborhoods. We need to make housing not just affordable, but part of livable communities. Affordable means building in the right places, building smarter and faster, and building more choices and more non-market homes. While livable means building neighborhoods, close, convenient communities that bring everything we need together, including each other. These are our 5 ways to affordability. But there's actually one more. We need everyone, governments, the private sector, and nonprofit housing providers to work together to fix this. And we need you to tell your MPP that they've got 5 things to do to help everyone have an affordable, livable home now. Learn all that you can do at 5wayshome.ca.
So, the campaign that we launched in end of June lives on 5wayshome.ca website. And I just want to spend a moment just showing you what's there, because there are, I think, some really interesting resources there. You can download the report. We've developed a 40-plus page glossy report, lots of pictures, written in very simple language for everyday people. And the report has a kind of 5 sections. And for each section, we have a whole bunch of recommendations for each order of government. On the website, you can just cursor down. You can jump to any one of the 5 action areas. And when you get to one, you see a short 1-minute video, which is kind of a shorter version of what you just saw for each action area. You can learn more about the topic, or you can jump to the Take Action page. So lots of information here, lots of links to social media, etc. It's a way of educating people and providing them with hope. Now, we all know, well, I hope we all know that we're going to be voting on Thursday. And I've been giving talks like this across the province for the last number of weeks. And goals have been twofold. One, to ensure voters know about the province's ruinous sprawl plans that harm the Greenbelt, farmland, and natural areas while only making the housing crisis worse. And 2, to spread hope about how to make homes affordable and part of livable communities by promoting the 5 Ways Home actions. We have a lot of power. I think we kind of forget that. And this is where I believe it comes from. Our opinions are shaped by those we trust, which are typically our friends and our networks. And each of us have friends and networks that trust us. And the organizations that some of you are with also have members that trust them. So collectively, this gives us power to influence many tens of thousands of people with message of hope and with a kind of a realistic, truthful assessment of what's going on. But of course, to use this power, we need tools that help us effectively connect with our friends and networks. And so we developed a toolkit, which lives on the liveableontario.ca website. If you go there, go to the resources section, and you'll see this. I just want to spend a moment showing you what is there. Of course, we've only got 3 days before election, so not a lot of time left. We have a take action section. I think this is still a worthwhile action regardless, where you can send a letter to every political party leader, and it asks them to endorse the party platforms. We have heard back from 3 of the 4 leaders who have said that they will endorse the 5 Ways Home actions. The 4th party that has not responded is the Progressive Conservative Party. We then have, there's a flyer that you can distribute. Again, there's not a lot of time left. We have a poster you could print off and put on your door so that when candidates, should they come knocking, they can see that you support 5 Ways Home. Then we have a whole bunch of information tools, the provincial housing report card I spoke about earlier, the report that we specifically created for Ontario provincial party leaders, the website, the 3-minute video I just showed you, our social media tools, and ways to invite us to speak, because we need to continue talking about this to get the message out. So what can you do? I know you've only got a few days left, but use our tools to talk to your friends, networks, and organizational members about making homes affordable and part of livable communities. Use your email and social media channels to promote our actions and resources, and invite the Alliance to speak to your group or network. Yes, the election is happening on Thursday, but these issues are going to remain with us. And if the polls are accurate, the party in power will be back, and they will likely continue with the policies that have frankly made their housing crisis worse. So one more thing I want to talk about before we turn it over to all of you for discussion. After the election, we need to get all MPPs at Queen's Park to work together to protect us from the White House threats. I think we all, those of us who are on this call, understand how challenging the words that come from the White House are. We need to do something, and the province needs to do something. And so many of us got together. This was separate from the Alliance for Liveable Ontario, and we created something called the Trillium Declaration. And you can find all of this at trilliumdeclaration.ca. As it says here, join fellow Ontarians and help create a stronger, more resilient and prosperous Ontario. The urgency is we have to get ready to the unprecedented threats that are coming from our neighbors. And the idea is to come up with a to-do list for the Ontario legislature to help us build a more resilient and prosperous Ontario. And I just want to spend 1 minute outlining what's in the declaration. As you can see here, there's a preamble. And then essentially we say, we residents of Ontario agree to work together, set aside our political differences, build cross-party political consensus for these priority provincial actions, make our public health care system effective and resilient, ensure food security. For example, we need to stop building on precious farmland, ensure there's proper income support for those in need, build the housing we need and can afford, specifically stop building or stop making a priority to build single-family homes in subdivisions, create a climate-resilient future, properly fund our education system, reduce costs for municipal taxpayers. The taxes are going to go up if more suburban sprawl gets built, and that's the last thing we can afford right now. And then finally, direct funds to actions that help the most number of people. For those of you in Ontario, you know that the current government is subsidizing the construction of a private spa in the tune of over $1 billion, wants to build mega highways, and is talking about building tunnels under highways. That's probably, well, I can say not probably, that is not a good investment of public dollars. And we need to make sure that our public dollars are invested in things that are actually going to help Ontarians weather the Trump tariff threats. So if you're interested in the declaration, please go to trilliumdeclaration.ca and just complete it there. You can read more there, as I said. And with that, I thank you very much for your time. I'm going to stop the screen share and hand it back to to others to have a Q&A now.
Okay, before we start the Q&A, I just want to note that I put the link to the Trillium Declaration in the chat and copied and pasted your 8 points from your website. Yeah, it's amazing. And I'd like to pass things over to Robert Lockhart for a second to express our gratitude before we open up the Q&A and discussion. So Robert, I think you met him at the beginning of our half an hour before we start up. He chairs our Community Action Committee. He's very involved with the Political Action Committee. And one of his passions is keeping up with all aspects of electrification of vehicles and energy, something that he loves to share with others through his involvement with 4RG, the Electric Vehicle Society of Canada. And actually, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, but I feel like anyone can ask you a question at any point of the day, and you would love to answer that. So if you could unmute yourself, Robert, and I'll pass things to you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Beth. So on behalf of 4 grandchildren, friends, I'd like to thank you very much for this informative and very thought-provoking presentation. As an urban planner of over 50 years, I appreciate the need to be thinking more innovatively in the way we locate and plan our communities and design and build a wider variety of homes. It's long overdue, and we've got to get the conservative planners to start thinking outside of the box, as they say. So we at 4RG are constantly trying to influence how communities are planned in Peterborough area, especially encouraging ways to reduce our carbon footprint of buildings and creating complete communities, encouraging active transportation, and pushing for the electrification of heating, cooling, and transportation. So I learned a lot tonight, and I hope everybody else did. And it's really you put the gauntlet down to us to take action, and it's only going to happen if we do it by individual and small groups. It's the only way we're going to get anything done, and we just have to keep going, marching on as a large army of very dedicated people trying to make some change. So thank you for being inspiring tonight.
Absolutely, and thank you from this end as well. And so I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions now, so we'll turn that over. It actually does make it easiest for us if you use the electronic hands up thing on the menu at the bottom of your screen. That way we can kind of keep an order to things, but we'll also check for questions in the chat as well. And so I think we already have a hand up, and oh right, if you have other resources related to what we're talking about tonight, certainly you can feel free to put those in the chat as well. And we have a hand up here from Brian Patterson, our Calgary viewer. So we'll turn it over to him for the question.
Yeah, Franz, I'll pay your airfare to Alberta. That was a fantastic presentation, and it raises it's so educational, but it raises so many questions. I thank you very much. I just have one question out of about 30 that occurred to me, and that is that you didn't mention really, other than the fact that you live in a beautiful neighborhood at Bloor and Dufferin. You didn't mention Toronto. Most of the zoning decisions are made within the city, and I'm wondering why the focus is entirely on Doug Ford and not on the civic deciders.
Right. So, Brian, I don't know if you are from Ontario or Toronto, or if you've spent your life in Calgary, or...
No, I was born in Toronto at Yonge and St. Clair.
Got it. Okay. So the city of Toronto is only responsible for planning decisions within the city of Toronto. And most of people who live in what's called the Greater Golden Horseshoe do not live in the city of Toronto. And within every municipality, that municipality is responsible for local land use planning decisions. The reason I focused on Doug Ford, and more generally the provincial government, is that under the Canadian Constitution, the provincial government has control over land use planning. And land use planning is the most important tool in determining where housing gets built, what sort of housing gets built, etc. And the province has two big pieces of two laws, what's called the Provincial Policy Statement and the Planning Act. And these two laws kind of set the rules for all municipalities in Ontario. And so municipalities essentially have to do what the province says they has to do. And what the province has done in the last 2.5 years is that they have changed the playing field to make it extremely easy to build so-called suburban sprawl housing, and they have made it much more difficult for municipalities to support building housing within existing towns and cities. So again, I didn't speak about Toronto because Toronto only has an impact on land within its boundaries, and because Ontario, the province has created planning rules in the last number of years that have made it very difficult to build a diversity of housing types within existing towns and cities, and they've made it very easy, to be blunt, for a small number of developers to benefit from building more suburban sprawl.
Thank you very much.
Al,
I'm with a group trying to do a co-housing development. Don't know if you're familiar with co-housing, but
Yep.
the idea is, right, so it's an intentional community where you've got common space, but encourages social interaction. And we've pivoted recently from an ownership model to a rental model for various reasons. And specifically, we're looking at a rental co-op model because it seems to really make units more affordable for people. And I just wondered if you can comment on the merits of sort of co-op rental housing as opposed to other kinds.
Yeah. So full disclosure, my spouse Karen has been working for a lawyer who has been supporting co-op housing for 30 plus years. And so I'm quite familiar with co-op housing, although I've never lived in a co-op place. For those of you who are unfamiliar with co-op housing is a type of non-for-profit housing. And the way most co-ops in Ontario, at least, were developed is that at some point in the past, some order of government, probably the federal or provincial governments, lent them a whole bunch of money at a very, very low interest rate, and the money was then used to hire on a private sector builder who built the co-op units, and now the co-op runs them. And it is a self-governance model. So all of the people who live in the co-op elect a board, and then the board makes decisions on behalf of all of the tenants. And every year, again, depending on the bylaws of the co-op, a board is elected or re-elected, etc. And then the board hires on property managers, essentially, and they run it on a non-for-profit basis. In the past, governments used to give subsidies to certain units for the co-ops to provide the units at a very, very low price. And some co-ops also have what are called market rents. But the goal of co-ops is to provide housing that is affordable. Their mandate is not to make money and for their members. Rather, it is to provide ongoing, secure, safe, permanent housing. And people who are in co-ops can effectively stay there until they die or move out. It is, and they don't have to worry about rent increases that will fund some private sector developers. So I'm a huge fan of housing co-ops because I think that when you've got members running it, it's usually a recipe for ensuring that the housing stays at a particular standard. Like anything, there are problems, but we need more housing co-ops because that's how you're going to create not-for-profit or non-market housing. The private sector isn't going to do it because the private sector's job is to make money. And that means they're going to charge as much rent as they can. And that's not good for creating affordable units.
Thank you. That was very useful.
all right, up next we have Cheryl Lyon.
I just like quickly to pick up on what Franz is saying and expand it and go into a little history that people may not know. You were describing the co-op model, Franz. That also extended to what we used to call nonprofit housing. And it was not on the co-op model. So for those who live in Peterborough, you may or may not know that we have just under maybe 1,500 units of very affordable housing in this community that was built on that nonprofit model. It goes back to the creation of what was called public housing. The grandmother of all was Regent Park in Toronto, right? And that's when government said, we will help you to fund, very similar to the model that you're talking about. So I chaired the board of a nonprofit. And then while I worked at the city, I oversaw the city's portfolio, if you want to call it that, of nonprofit housing in Peterborough. And I learned that people in town did not know about this model. And these quiet, hardworking boards, volunteer boards of directors who governed them. Now, over the years, their very affordable mortgages were paid down. The rents were geared to income. And at the end of these mortgages, some of them have already expired, some of them are close to ending, they have an asset which could continue to be affordable. And nobody seems to be talking about this model anymore. I guess people with gray hair go back long enough to remember it. What is lacking, of course, is the government commitment to do that subsidizing. And if they're subsidizing developers and making land deals and making land available and doing all those things that you mentioned, why in heaven's name can we not return a government to the table and fund housing directly for people whose income is low and is at the rent is at no more than 30% of your income?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly why, Action 4 invest heavily in non-market housing is absolutely key. Governments have to start investing again. And let's be clear, our tax dollars have been going to subsidize private developers for years.
Yes.
Many of you have probably heard of real estate investment trusts. They developed, I believe it was in the late 90s. These essentially large pools of capital that were brought together, and a corporation was set up called a REIT, R-E-I-T, Real Estate Investment Trust. And the REIT started buying up buildings, old buildings, and if there were affordable units in them, they would evict people, do the renovations, and then put them back on the market for a higher rent. And the goal of the REIT, like every private corporation, understandably so, because it's a private corporation, is to make as much money for their investors. The government gave tax breaks to REITs on the assumption that REITs would somehow or another provide affordable units. Well, 25 years later, we saw that that didn't work. So when people say, oh, we can't afford to, to subsidize co-op housing, my response is, well, we've been subsidizing private developers for decades, and it's gotten us nothing. But it's gotten some private developers some very, very, very sizable profits over the years, and it's created this housing crisis. So the federal and provincial governments need to come back to the table and need to invest heavily in non-market housing. And again, if you say, well, if we can't afford that, ask the now 80,000 plus people who are living on the streets, who can no longer afford units, who no longer afford rents. Ask the probably, I would imagine there could be, well over 1 million people who are living in homes that are way too expensive for them, or they're living in a home which has 3 bedrooms and there's probably 10 people living in there. There is a huge price that we're already paying from the housing crisis. So it's time for the government to come back to the table and to help nonprofit organizations build and then run housing that's affordable to people.
Thank you for that question, Cheryl, and a very detailed answer. That was great. Keith Dalton has a question.
Hi. I just had a simple question, and kind of new to the whole legislative side of this, but I'd like to know if Bill 23, which the province enacted to encourage densification, urban densification, is that What's your critique of that particular legislation? Because it sounds like you're looking for more.
Right. So Bill 23 is an example of a new type of legislation that has been used more and more in the last 10 years. Full disclosure, I have a PhD in politics, so I've been studying governments for a long time. And what governments have increasingly done is something called omnibus legislation, where they throw everything in the kitchen sink into one bill. And it's true that Bill 23 made it legal to bill for any property owner to put in 3 units in their property, right? But that was one of the few, I would say, positive things that was in there. The vast majority of the changes in Bill 23 actually helped support suburban sprawl and took away important democratic powers that people had. Eliminated a whole bunch of environmental protections that were crucial, not to things like, you know, the ability of conservation authorities to investigate development proposals and determine whether or not they were actually going to increase or increase flood risks. So yes, Bill 23 had one thing in it that said from now on every property in Ontario zoned residential can have 3 units in it, but that was it. Do we want more? Yes, we definitely want more. And I think one of the things to remember about density, when you mention density, a lot of people think of density like a light switch. They think about the density that they're used to, which for most people is kind of a residential area where you have single family homes. And then they think if you let density in, you hit a switch, and before you can blink, you're going to have 40-story towers next door to you. And that has happened, and that does happen in many places because the province has created legislation that allows large developers to come in and build these huge buildings that are inappropriate. But density doesn't need to be either single-family homes or 40-story towers. There's things called gentle density, and for those of you who live in downtown Peterborough, you'd have some sense of what that is. You can introduce a whole bunch of interesting ways of doing density. For example, there's an amazing tool online called rehousing.ca. It's been created by 2 architects from the University of Toronto. And what they've done is they've identified kind of 15 typical single-family home types that you will see in Ontario. And then they say, well, what if we were to turn the single-family home into a 2-unit home, or a 3-unit, or a 4-unit, or a 5-unit, or a 6-unit? And they provide sample floor plans for those various options. And this is a way of introducing gentle density at different scales, depending on the circumstances, into your community. We need more of that because we have the land within existing towns and cities. And frankly, that's where we want to live. That's where our children and grandchildren want to live. We shouldn't be sending them out to suburbia where they have to drive to get everywhere.
Okay, thank you, Keith. That was a great question. Ian, you did have your hand up. It's not up now. Did you have a question?
Yes, thanks very much. Hi, Franz. It's Ian Attridge.
Hello, Ian.
Good to see you, and thanks for all your great work and a great presentation. A couple of things going on here in the Peterborough area. One is that our official plan approved in 2021 did maintain our municipal boundaries. They did not expand, which was a real accomplishment. But we're seeing, and with our land needs assessment, we identified that we have more areas for dealing with housing to meet the needs to past 2051. And so that's from our planners. And so we have enough space for housing, as you were saying. We need to do it better. And two of the issues that are being faced here in Peterborough is revisiting our official plan and looking at converting peripheral areas that were identified for housing into industrial areas or employment lands. And that's a big conversation right now. And also, we're currently, there's a survey online at Connect Peterborough, the city's website, around our growth areas along our major arterial corridors. And so what we're finding is some questions around how high should some of these apartment buildings or other kinds of units be. So height for a modest city like we have, and the conversion of residential areas to industrial or employment lands. I'd appreciate any comments on that, and really appreciate the comments on Bill 23, a real disaster for the province. Really, just one of those massive changes that are make it difficult for planners to keep up.
Yeah. I'm really glad that Peterborough or that council resisted the. I'm sure there was a push from some developers to expand the urban boundaries. Sadly, urban boundaries were expanded in a lot of places across Ontario that didn't need it. And just before I address your specific question, Ian, I just want to underscore a myth, and I would say a lie. Let's be clear. It's a lie that the building industry and land development sector, that's the organization that represents some of the most powerful development industries and land speculators in Ontario. They keep saying, oh, there's not enough land set aside for housing. Well, they're wrong. I mean, the data is absolutely clear on this. We had a report written by a former planner, Kevin Eby from Region of Waterloo, who looked at all of the data that had been submitted by municipalities in 2022 to where they were asked by the province, tell us how much land you have and how many housing units you could build. And based on very conservative assumptions, and Kevin Eby added up all the numbers and said there's enough land already set aside, this was in 2021, to build over 2 million homes. And of course, you all remember that Doug Ford has been saying for 3 years, we need to build 1.5 million homes. Environmental Defence Canada, one of the partners of the Alliance for Liveable Ontario, commissioned a number of land use planners to look at existing land that had already been set aside for housing in the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And they found that there's enough land set aside to build, I think, over 4 million homes at density levels similar to what's, for those of you who know downtown Toronto, Little Italy, which is not very dense. So there is enough land. What goes in a particular piece of land that's an existing town or city? Should it be industrial? Should it be for housing? What sort of housing density should be there? That has to be discussed by local residents and municipalities in a fair and democratic process. And it has to be, and the process has to be democratic so that NIMBYs, people who resist new homes simply because they don't want things to change, don't get the final vote. Because we do need to build housing within existing towns or cities, right? At the same time, we shouldn't open up zoning so that you can build a 40-story skyscraper in a residential area. There has to be a middle ground, and this is what municipal government is about, right? This is the place you should be having these discussions, but the discussions have to be fair and equitable. Power cannot lie in the hands of the developers or in one particular special interest. It has to be shared equally amongst all the residents in the city. And if you have such a process, is it going to be messy? Yes. Will it lead to some mistakes? Yes. But that, I believe, is the surest way of getting to the right sort of housing that will meet community needs.
Okay, thank you very much. I see Brian's got his hand up, but before we get to Brian, I kind of have a semi-related question to that one there. And so Beth and I live outside of the city of Peterborough near Millbrook, and it has experienced, I would say, a doubling of the area in which housing is there. They're almost entirely single family homes. Is that more, when it comes to small communities like that, is that more of a municipal thing, or is that still governed by what you were saying earlier with the province making it more attractive to expand the boundaries?
So municipalities determine what gets built in lands that they are responsible for. And I think that, I'm sorry, I'm just looking for the person who is an urban planner who's, I just can't see it. Robert Lockhart would be able to kind of give you details on all of this. But in your case, Scott, I suspect the municipality made that decision. However, as I noted before, the province sets overall general planning rules, and the province has made it really easy for developers to push suburban sprawl and have made it much more difficult to do appropriate infill. Now, I don't know if in the small community you're in, I don't know if there's an old kind of town center or village center. And if so, again, would it be appropriate to put 2, 3, 4-story homes there? I can't answer that question, but the municipality does play a role in making these decisions. And so even if there are bad provincial planning rules, municipalities can still have some power. They are constrained by provincial laws, but they still have some power. And that's why it's absolutely vital for everyone to continue focusing on your municipality and your councillors and showing them that there are options, that they do not have to buy into the suburban sprawl myth, that there are other ways of doing it. It may be more challenging for them to do that because of provincial laws, but they can still do that.
Okay, thank you.
This is an existential question. We are at the mercy of rampant capitalism, which is for which our governments, provincial and federal, are complicit. They are helping these guys. That leaves middle class and poor people absolutely helpless. There must be a solution. I have no idea what it is, but I am determined to see if I can find it. So if there is a Martin Luther King Jr. or a Chavez or somebody out there who might lead the charge, what we need is some kind of a revolution. I'll stop there because I realize that's not the topic, but I also want to say to you, Franz, everything that you have said about Ontario applies to Alberta as well. That's why I would pay your airfare to come out here. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, I will address that, Brian, in a very simple way and say we need to ensure that the rules and the practices and the habits that we have in running society need to be based on kindness and responsible sharing. And I think we need to do everything we can in our day-to-day lives, and when we are working in community, and when we are speaking to our elected officials, and when we're shopping and spending money, is support people, support businesses, support rules, support cultures that engage in responsible sharing, and I think that's how we start a revolution.
Good. And if I could just thank you very much for that. And if I could just mention, I am with Seniors for Climate. I believe that for our grandchildren is an endorser. And if there's anyone there with gray hair who has not yet signed on to Seniors for Climate, I invite you to do so.
Thank you for that. Yes, and we do share some of your materials on our site as well.
Just before we move to the next question, someone's asking where to get phone numbers for our counselors. So Al or Guy or somebody else want to speak to that?
If you Google City of Peterborough council, it comes up with one page which has all of the names and all of the contact information there, both phone numbers and email addresses.
Excellent.
Wonderful. And Laura, I think she's had to sign off, but she said, thank you so much for the interesting presentation. There's a collective housing project underway in Owen Sound called Glassworks. They've purchased a piece of land, but are awaiting rezoning. Fingers are crossed. Oh, and then, yeah, Laura's also giving us a link to City Hall, Mayor, and Council contact information. Thank you.
Perfect. David Morton.
Hi, no cheap shots, Beth, okay? Um, one of the discussions we've been having at 4RG on and off for a couple of years now is the level of hope we have for any possible real solution to the environment. And I listening to your presentation today, Franz, I thought it was great. But as I listened, I went, why have any hope that this can happen? Because you look at the government we're about to elect, and we don't know what's happening federally, but I guess I just ask you a very simple question. Do you have realistic hope? By the way, at 4RG, we vary from no hope, which is just about where I am, to others that have greater hope. What hope do you have that, and seriously, that you could, that, I mean, your organization is doing great stuff, but where do you have hope you can actually get government somewhere to actually listen to this? And if so, I want the magic secret.
So first of all, do I have hope? Yes. And I mean, I as you can see, I've got gray hair. I'm not a grandfather yet. So I'm still I'm probably at least 5 years away from that happening. But I've been on I've spun around this planet now, I guess almost 61 times. And what I'm realizing, and a bit of a diversion, but I think this is a really important question, David. So I'm going to spend a few moments talking about it. My spouse and I were in Rome in October. It was a big year for us last year, anniversaries, birthdays, etc. So we decided to go somewhere we hadn't gone before. And for those of you who have been to Rome before, it's an incredible place. I mean, you're walking on streets that people have been walking on for over 2,000 years, in some instances, 2,600 years. And when you're there, you kind of, at least for me, it became really clear how insignificant my life was, and the life of any person, to be blunt, right? You know, if we're lucky, we're on this earth for maybe 85, 90 years. And that is a small blip in human history. And while I was there, I was also reading a book by a historian. I'm going to get the name wrong. I believe it's Harari. I think it's called A Brief History of Humanity. It came out in 2011. It was the only page-turner history book I've ever read. And he does, I think, a really interesting job in kind of describing the last 150,000 years of history of Homo sapiens. Because I think it was called Sapiens, A Brief History of Sapiens or whatever. And as I'm reading this in Rome, and it's like, wow, this is a blip. Like, my life is a blip. The last 100 years is a blip. The last 400 or 500 years is frankly a blip in human history. And I mention that, David, because I've spent too much of my life thinking about what is that magic elixir that's going to bring about the change. And I'm now of the conclusion that that magic elixir is, whatever it is, I'm not going to see the fruit of that. And I think that magic elixir is doing exactly what we're doing this evening. It's talking, it's connecting, it's exchanging ideas, it's having mutually respectful conversations about challenging topics. It's about keeping our minds open to doing things differently, because human beings, generally as a species, we don't like change, right? We're just like, we're afraid of it. And so I have hope that maybe when my daughter's my age, maybe my grandchildren, if I live long enough to see them, that they will be in a better world, and a better planet. I do have faith and belief that humanity is capable of that and will eventually get there. But I'm no longer hung up in thinking about, oh my God, this has to happen in my lifetime. And I think I was always naive in thinking that this sort of change is going to happen in my lifetime, because human history doesn't work at that time scale. It works at a much slower time scale. And so I've kind of just come to terms with that. And I have learned to enjoy just connecting with people like I'm doing this evening. And that to me is the magic elixir. Do more of this, connect with people, lead with kindness, responsible sharing. That's how we make things better. We recreate, reproduce that culture, pass that on to our children and grandchildren. And I think that 300-400 years from now, we're going to have an amazing species, but I'm not going to be around to see it, so I don't know.
Thank you. I'm not sure I feel any more hopeful, but thank you.
Okay, so yeah, Dave, you did poke the bear, so I just have to jump in with one more comment if I can, to build on what Franz is saying. One thing that I think is super important is that we, engage like Franz is suggesting, like we're all doing, because we're here building relationships, doing what we can, but also, taking that time to step away from it. We don't have to watch every train wreck. And so what's really helped me a lot is that idea that comes from, a woman who lived through the Black Plague, who talked about intentionally taking time to hold the grief and the joy equally. And I think that's been the one thing through like a whole life of worrying about the environment. And oddly enough, my worries don't fix too many problems. I don't know.
Yeah.
I thought I had more power than that, but apparently not. But just letting it go, and also recognizing it is such a gift, or whatever. We're lucky to be here, and there's still so much beauty and joy, and use that to fuel this work that we're doing.
And I will, one other thing I should have said, but thank you for Beth for reminding me to say this. There is a lot of really, really good, interesting stuff going on out there. A lot of people are doing a lot of neat things. You guys are a microcosm of this. And of course, we don't see that, or that's not at the top of the social media feeds. That's not going to lead on the 6 p.m. news, right? But there are a lot of decent, wonderful people out there trying to make things better. And never forget that. And, one coping strategy that I think is really important, and I know that this has been said, if probably for millennia, spend some time every day showing gratitude for what you have, and also for and acknowledging that there's a lot of neat things out there. Don't let the obsession with just looking at train wrecks guide you, because for every train wreck, there are 100 of wonderful gardens being nurtured and created and flourishing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Al and Linda, your comment was, Franz, you are part of the magic elixir you spoke of. Thank you. And
we are all part of that.
I agree. They have Al and Linda have their hand up, so we'll pass it to you folks.
Yeah, I do have a comment, and that is that people have talked about government funding, and I agree with you, Franz, that government put very little money since about the 70s into affordable housing. In June, they did announce a new program of about, I think, $1 billion aimed specifically through CMHC at co-op rental housing. So it looks like there's been at least some renewal of that commitment. It is really nice to see. Just thought I would mention that, because people may not be aware of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it is important to acknowledge it is an important first step, but if this is the only step, then it's not nearly enough. And we need a lot more. Like, we literally need probably $60-70 billion a year. And frankly, that's a small price to pay. For those of you who are paying attention to who read the Toronto Star on the weekend, there was a report about how much it would cost to build a tunnel under the 401 to supposedly deal with congestion, about $70 billion. So if we can come up with that amount of money to build a tunnel for more cars, surely to God, we can come up with money to actually provide decent housing for people.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
He has a question.
So I just wanted to point out something that Ian Attridge just posted in the chat, and that is that on the For Our Grandchildren website, you can find it very quickly from the second menu item. There's a summary of the positions that the provincial candidates claimed to have on the environment. It's right there, so it can help you decide how to vote. It won't tell you who to vote for, but it can sure let you know who not to vote for if you look at that, and we're quite clear about that. The other thing that I'd like to say is that on the For Our Grandchildren website, we have this debate, as Morton was saying earlier, about hope and not hope, and should we be scaring people with frightening actions? And I scour the internet for positive examples of things that people are doing which are making a difference. And we're trying to say, yes, we can make a difference. David, it might not be enough for us to be able to see it for our grandchildren, as Franz said, but I think that we can say that there are things that are happening and there are people who are doing them, and we scour around to try to find those. And I think recently I found 3 different Canadian news sources who have fair number of positive examples of what can go on, and one of them is the Toronto Star. There's a guy named Ovid Chown who's got a little podcast where he talks about little things that people are doing. And if you follow Catherine Hayhoe, she has the same thing. She has every week in her newsletter, she doesn't talk about it on the Canadian experience, she talks about it worldwide. But there's lots of things that people are doing. Those things make a difference.
I will just comment on that. A couple of thoughts on negative versus positive messaging. I have been a practicing environmentalist starting as a volunteer in 1990. So I've been at this a long time, and I used negative messaging probably fairly consistently through until 2014. And not surprising, all I ended up doing was, talking to the choir. And in 2014, a very wise person who I knew said, Franz, you need to start on better understanding how the human brain works. Because what we're doing is trying to convince people to do things differently. And all the information and people's opinions and how they understand the world is all dealt with, moderated, affected by the brain. And the brain, like any machine, has certain ways of doing things, and we need to understand that. And so one of the things that I started investigating this, and there's a great neuroscientist named George Lakoff, Lakoff. And if you haven't read any of his work, I strongly advise you to. He looks at neuroscience and takes the lessons learned from neuroscience and applies them to how to communicate. And one of the insights from Lakoff is that, human beings don't like things that are negative. We kind of step away from it. Our brains are hardwired to get an endorphin rush, right? You get that from being happy. You get that from feeling positive. When somebody, you don't go, hey, I want to find some bad news because that's going to make me feel good. You never do that. Like nobody kind of does that. And if they do, they probably aren't in the best mental shape. Most of us say, I want something that's going to make me happy. And so we need to offer them things that make them happy. And I don't want to pretend that to be, I have rose-tinted glasses on. I know there's a lot of misery out there in the world, and I know that what we're doing to the environment is extraordinarily damaging. But I think we need to lead with, we can make life better for you. And here's how. And address the problems that are, and say, we're going to solve these problems that you have. I think that's how we get people, versus the sky is falling, things are going to fall apart. It's just going to get worse unless you act now. because all that happens is that people keep their heads in the sand. They deny it. Anyway, that's my 2 cents worth, and I must admit it's been a long day for me, so I'm kind of reaching the end of my capacity to answer anything with any sort of wisdom or coherence. So
Well, you were,
unless there's any other questions, I think I'm done.
you were wise to the last second, Franz. That was wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, especially after a long day.
Yeah, I appreciate it. You use the words sharing and kindness and understanding moving forward, whether we're talking about the housing crisis or politics or
Yeah.
whatever, all the divisions that separate people. And I think to evolve anywhere as a society, that probably is part of the answer. And so yes, thanks again for you coming out to speak to us and for all the members that came out to listen. And I look forward to sharing this with a wider community through our socials when we get the recording all lined up. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for your great conversations and discussion. Take care.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.